Our next speaker is Janet Laurence. Janet Laurence is a leading Sydney-based artist who examines our physical, cultural, and conflicting relationship with the natural world. She creates immersive environments that navigate the interconnections between organic elements and systems of nature. Within the recognized threat to so much of the life world, Janet explores what it might mean to heal the natural environment. Her work is included in museum, university, corporate, and private collections, as well as within architectural and landscaped public places. I'll hand it over to Janet.
Hello to everyone, and I'd like to pay my respects to the Indigenous elders, past and present of this land, and may I ask for their help in continuing to live here. My work, as mentioned, brings attention to the fragility of our environment. I feel that at a time like now, in this time of total catastrophe, we need to find new ways to think about how we're going to live on this planet. How are we going to find new ethics to live with? And of course, the biggest one is how we're going to live and care for our living environment. And so I go to all these fragile places and observe what is happening out there in the wild, the so-called wild, and I create environments from that to bring attention to and to bring because my work is exhibited in public spaces like museums and things, there is a broad public who can observe it. So here in the forests of Tasmania, for some years I went and saw the destruction of the sticks, and the tarkine is continuing. And then I make these works that then show this incredible fragility of this nature and how we can create an empathy for it and a caring for it. And so these sort of works are quite big, huge, immersive works, like about 6 meters in length, where in actual detail you can see the forests reflected into this forensic glass. This whole series is called The Forensic Sublime: Crimes Against the Landscape. And you can observe this story of what is happening there in these forests and, of course, be shocked by it, because most people don't realise what's going on. But I get into the coops because they just think, oh, she's a silly old lady. And I can go in there with all my lab glass and get all my photographs and observe what's happening. So these sort of works I've also shown a lot in London. And of course, they're totally appalled about this is all happening here in Australia in our old growth forests. And then to bushfire sites, I try and build like little temporary kind of sanitarium, as though like a cellular garden where they're kind of feeding them and trying to kind of bring attention to the fact that these sort of places we've got to nurture and think about why these fires are happening. This is some time ago, by the way, but then the works end up evolving in museums and galleries as big sort of artworks that people can make their stories about, but they can sort of experience that landscape, but also this medicinal overlaying of it. So these sort of works have all come about through a whole series of bushfire works, and then a whole series of glass works where I experimented with this kind of alchemy of burning in glass every different plant to watch and observe how every plant created its own different type of burnt material, a most extraordinary sort of experiment, in fact, what happened to all of these glass eggs. The work's called Carbon Futures, and it's kind of ongoing in a way because it was so experimental and exploratory, and I'm always wanting to try and get into the being and the nature of the plants. In Chiapas, I went to the forests that they were being pulled down, taking away the whole life of indigenous people, as well, of course, as the trees, the habitat, the whole life that's been lost there. It was over 12 years ago I was there, and since then it's just been a massive destruction. I was observing the cutting down of the forest. I created these huge veils over those areas, which becomes this, as you can see, a veiled work of the evidence of what was there. And then these little cellular gardens in front are like these little medicinal kind of vials of hope. Photographed all the seeds on the ground of what was being lost, and then tried to, of course, we can't bring them into Australia, so I've been able with the Botanical Gardens to create these little cellular gardens. This work now belongs in a museum, and the interesting thing I found is that the museum curators love looking after this work because they have to look after the plants. And this is this incredible thing that when you create work, artwork, that needs care and attention, people, it gives them a great feeling of generosity themselves. They feel a lot better. And my idea is that you could take that out into the environment. So these works are works I work with the Botanical Gardens in Mount Annan on a whole lot of plants that they were trying to explore were suffering from climate change in northern Queensland. And so they're doing experiments on them. And this is in a show I had at the MCA. It's called Cellular Gardens. And it's like the little plants are sort of feeding one another, as you can see in the previous slide. And then I've also tried experimenting so you can observe this nature of individual plants in these vials that I have blown, and they can live for a long time. I just do it really basically with a lot of water crystals and just observing the whole little tiny habitat that begins to form or ecosystem at least, within the vial. And they've lasted for years and years, and life goes on. It's quite surprising in my studio, they still live. But I'm also wanting to bring attention to the extraordinary beauty and wonder that we have out there, to realise what we could be losing this, and try and bring it into a more experiential way, because so many people, they don't realise what's there in those forests. And so I sometimes just have huge works just hanging, slightly amplified, floating on a wall, creating their own shadows of trees throughout the world that I've photographed and present in these ways. And also big multiple works of combining different trees and habitats, and to try and talk about what I call this sacred green series. And then also hanging from the roof of the Macquarie Bank in London is the Tarkine forest hanging upside down with the whole story of it. And of course, you put it into that corporate power environment and everyone has to read it. And I'm working towards a whole development of a whole fund to help contribute to saving the Tarkine. And it's even working towards it going onto this huge register, because it's probably one of the most important temperate rainforests in the world, and there it is being mined and logged. And people don't realise the astonishing habitat there and the astonishing world of plants, fungi. They don't even know half of the stuff that's down there that they're absolutely horrendously tearing into. But mainly I make hospitals for plants in very public places. This is in the Botanic Gardens in Sydney. I was enabled through being part of a Sydney Biennale, and it's called Waiting, a hospital for plants, for ailing plants. And it was there for 6 months, and I really brought in a lot of ailing, sick plants and a few well ones to create all the wards of a hospital. And it's in a little type of mesh tent, and people walk around it and engage in detail with these different wards. And this is like a homeopathic ward and so on, and it's got a maternity ward, and it's got all these different sort of addressing all these things of life support systems and so on. And it's even, of course, it has a morgue, and then little tiny beds with the little tiny ailing little shoots and roots there. And you can just get the idea of this space, this very enmeshed space, and the attendants walk around in white coat and love to attend to the plants. And that's this whole idea of giving people the opportunity of showing care and healing, and why can't we take that into the wider world? So these kind of details also that, you know, you see this aspect of plants in a different way. And quite also medicinal images of plants, botanical drawings. The whole thing is quite museological. All the plants that died have ended up in the Art Gallery of New South Wales. They have this big vitrine work which has all of these elements in it now encased in some way, so they become more like objects, what I call alchemical objects, like the afterlife of plants, how they become. But there's also all these little owls in there, and they've been part of that whole lost habitat. And within this gallery, they look out onto a whole wall hanging of colonial paintings that are all revealing the beginnings of the destruction of our environment after the invasion. And this owl looks out and he sees beautiful green fields, but his tree is dead. It's the beginning of ring barking. So this whole work offers this story of the unsettling of our land. And of course, the fencing, you know, locking out Indigenous people from moving across, animals from moving across, and plants being killed like that. And then the mimicking in the paintings and the works inside is a constant, you know, play as you move around the whole piece. Another hospital was in Denmark, in a beautiful kind of environment where there was a lot of disease inhabiting some of the plants. So I researched there with the botanists and set that up inside the little wards of that hospital. And so you can look at these. Actually, these are kind of electron microscope images actually of fungus within some of the plants. And you just see this kind of playful idea of this scientific investigation, which is based on the real data of that garden. These are just things in my studio, lying around in the studio. And then rather than a hospital, this is actually a kind of condensed display of a garden trying to show the inner life of plants, trying to capture the photosynthesis that's going on, the conversations that are going on between plants and their insects and other microorganisms, trying to find this whole buzzing life within plants in this museum space, which is all reflected all around you. So when you're in there, you are within that environment. You're within this buzz of the life. And there's lots of images that many of them are, in fact, microscopic images, but many of them it's just grabbed specimens of the plants that have dried in vials or left there to sort of dry out within the museum. And so it's just this kind of invitation into being within that plant's life, or those plants. And so it's, and a lot of this synthesis sort of images have come about through working with the botanists and developing a whole way of trying to show that as art. And a lot of the time it just happens like big images blown up enormously. So these cells are in fact enormous, and you see the activity going on within them. But then it's also translated into some other projects, like this architectural project, where I've taken that minuscule of the photosynthesis and the colours that have evolved from that, and the colours and the changing colours of the trees outside to evolve these colours and images that I've immersed into the glass, okay? So then the glass, this is huge, 6 stories up building. But so each of these glass panels, which are 3 metres in height each, have these sort of colours which change during time of day according to where the sun is. So it gives this sort of feeling of being within the breath of the plant when you're nearby, because it actually, the origins of all of this is from the plants. And then other sort of works are more museological, more memento mori, and this is a big work in the National Gallery of Australia called Requiem. It's about 8 metres long, or 10 metres long, I can't remember that, but just to get an idea of, this is a collection of all that we're losing and all we've lost in our environment, created in such a way as to make them form more like objects or texts on glass, or dried works from the from the environment. And you can just sort of see this incredible accumulation, a kind of wunderkammer for today. Not a wunderkammer of wonderful, spectacular things, but a wunderkammer of what we're losing. It's a wunderkammer of shame, really. And you can sort of see even the little koala features. And at the same time, I've been working on a lot to do with our waters after the bushfires, and this is a whole big exhibition of all of those waters and the poisoning of the waters from those bushfires. It was part of a huge show called that was held in the Paddington Reservoir Gardens, Requiem for the bushfires. I teamed up with Sydney Environment Institute, so it had lots of talks on extinction and lots of, we had a huge botanical display of Australian plants that have been affected by the bushfires and talks by the botanists. And the whole space was just filled with this reflection on the bushfires. And then in relation to that, a whole lot of my works have been very much about trees and the life within trees, the habitat, the relationship between the dead tree, like the corpse lying out. The whole series is called Heart Shock. And of course, heart shock is a real symptom registered in the sapwood of trees when they're traumatised. And so all of these trees, as I said, are like corpses, but it's this idea of can we regenerate life? Can we give them this alchemical afterlife to try and observe that in actual fact that's what happens when the tree falls in the natural world. Of course, it has its whole afterlife with the fungi, the minerals, and the other plants that take it over. So these sort of works are all different in different environments, address the different issues. So this tree is a huge Dutch elm, and this is in Belgrade, where this tree is absolutely immense. And it's, again, like a corpse lying out, bandaged and being fed water and hydrants. And it has attached to it a whole series of herbs and tubes weaving in and out of the tree and the herbs. And the attendant has to seriously keep all of those herbs going, putting new ones on every day. They're all medicinal herbs. It's very traditional there to work with all of these herbs and medicinally. And the amazing thing is there was this whole incredible colony of ants living in the tree that by the end of 6 months, there was a pile of wood below the tree. So it was this amazing thing of this life within the tree that you could actually hear. And they moved in and out of all the tubes. And it was this weird thing of this huge, big, dead tree with this incredible life within it and these herbs madly trying to heal it again. So, and then another type of heart shock is a huge hanging Citradora, where the tubes hanging down are the same colour as the tree and the vials beneath, as if they're collecting the fluids from the plant, or are they feeding them into the plant? So it's this thing of giving life, or is life falling away? And it's also a bit like when you walk through the vines of a forest, you know, sort of, so it's very immersive that you move through this whole environment and experience that. I've had a fabulous opportunity to work with a project called Earth Canvas, where it's artists with regenerative farmers to understand the processes that they're going through and have workshops down on the farm. So, you know, there's these incredible activities that happen that brings people into that environment and what the farmers are doing to try and regenerate the place. In my case, I've focused a lot on the trees, and I had to get everybody, like about 60, some skeptical sort of farmers and, you know, people about, you know, what's regenerative farming, to do a work. So that huge big tree they were all hugging, this big mother tree, has many, many little saplings as well. And it's right on the Murrumbidgee River with loads of river stones. And I asked everybody to find a stone, write on it something to the tree. Very intimate sort of thing for a lot of these very conservative people to do. At first they refused, they scoffed at the idea. In the end, they couldn't stop. They couldn't stop writing on stones and putting them at the base of trees. Every little tree had its stone beneath it, and it's continued, it's survived. It's been 4 years now, and they're still there, all these stones with these messages. But it was quite a beautiful thing to see so many people suddenly go, yeah, I can express love to that tree. I can do that. And then in the end, they wanted to create all the statements they made on a huge big sort of wall hanging. So it generated, I mean, I guess that's the sort of thing with doing these projects. It's about trying to bring care and attention to this living world. And we could make a big difference if everybody was doing it. So these are some of the works that I made for a big exhibition that we had in the National Museum of Australia about the sort of work that can evolve from observing these, for me, these amazing trees down on the Murrumbidgee, and this extraordinary Kurrajong tree that has its own mountain ground, a hill that it sits within. It's like this giant, powerful figure there with so much life within it and in the ground beneath it. It's a very powerful piece. And then from all my research on trees, I created in the MCA a theatre of trees, which is 90 hanging transparent veils. They're 7 metres high, each with a different tree on it from all different parts of the world. And you walk in this transparency. It's impossible to photograph, but you walk within these veils, and there's also video projections of the habitat that's within them. So it's mainly a lot of birds and sounds and different sort of light passing through. And so it's not realistic, but because it's all turned into negative. So it's got this kind of violet light, the sort of images that pass through it, but it creates a real haunting and a memory of a forest. But at the same time, it's also alerting to these lives of forests, you know, that we are losing too. And I had a whole little type of 3 little rooms off, like laboratories. And this one's called, this one's a library of trees. And it's got the most huge range of different images, different books about a wide range of aspects to trees, from mythological, scientific, historical, botanical, all sorts of information all jumbled in there together. Quotes from certain people, and you can see there a tree alphabet, and writings from Deborah Bird Rose, Richard Flanagan, different sort of people's acknowledgements about trees, and you know, again, a type of wunderkammer all laid onto this beautiful wooden, raw wooden shelving. And there was a herbarium with a collection of seeds and fragments of plants that all come from the collection of the Powerhouse, which was the original Ethnobotanical Museum of Sydney, where they, because it was the first, well, actually it was more like the first economic botany collection, where they were observing, of course, what could become our economy from the colony, but it's the most fantastic collection of oils and seeds. And there are also a lot of things I've made as well, combined in with it. So another type of wunderkammer, but specifically looking at other aspects of plants. And there's an Elixir lab. Now, the Elixir labs are things I've been making for quite a long time, where you actually imbibe the environment, where you take it into you, and you're enabled to experience your own transformation through doing that, through the person who administers it to you telling you all about that plant and its medicinal value. But also, they are in this environment that I create, this whole Elixir lab, which has images of the plants and botanical images of the plants, and all of this tubing up to the idea of the fluids of the plants. And so it's part imagined, part evidence, part imagined. And this storytelling that goes along with all the plants. In this case, they were all Australian native plants, and they were every night during this exhibition at the MCA, there were all these big events where people could go in and participate in it. My original Elixir lab was in Japan, in a place called Niigata. It's still there. It's a permanent work, and some of you may or may not know the Echiko Sumari Triennale. It's every 3 years. They invite artists to come into this environment, make work that addresses this environment. Some become permanent. I'm actually in another one this year, which is ongoing at the moment, but this work is now permanent, and it's a tiny, this is what it looks out onto. It's a tiny little building, a little wooden building that was actually transported from Hiroshima, all wood inside, not a single nail, all put together, and then they made me this beautiful cantilevered bar without a single nail. And then I collected, it was a project that took 3 years, so I would go in the summer and collect in the hills all the plants that traditionally had been used for medicine, and then we'd work out ways, and they would have old recipes of how they were used. I have a lot of the old books in there, transcribed onto screen prints, texts that talk about these old ways of using these herbs. And so they're actually quite delicious. Each one is just the pure juice of the plant. So I'm not making it, it's not trying to be the essence, but it's just trying to find why do certain plants taste in this way and that, because what I'm trying to do is make people recognise this incredible difference of being of the plants, as well as their medicinal value, but I'm wanting this attention to the plant rather than the human, if you know what I mean. So you can sort of see here the collection, when we've collected all the herbs and the different plants. I worked with a very elderly, sagely kind of botanist there who remembered so much of this, but so much had been lost since the war. So it was quite fantastic to work with him. And you can sort of see this beautiful space that you're within, and then you just taste with test tubes or a little shot. And then this is one that's in Shanghai. So again, just using the plants there, Chinese medicinal plants. Worked again with a Chinese botanist on which plants I could use. But of course, being in China, you've got all the places that also sell all of those Chinese medicines. So it was a bit of a mixture of both, of fresh and the dried ones, but looking at all of those different plants. And then this one's in Cuenca, where I worked with the women down in the markets with all the different herbs, and of course had my Olympia, and then every day collected mountains and mountains of these herbs, which were piled high onto a table in an old monastery. And it was an extremely long, 12-metre long table, very narrow table, and in a very narrow refectory room. So the whole room had this incredible scent that became a kind of, stink of rotting plants over the months, but it was a really potent space. And then I wanted it to be a real Wunderkammer type of herbarium, a type of amazing information, of layered information, again historical and mythological, and you can see there the whole old ancient stories about the use of the herbs. And so it's a very encyclopedic piece, and because it's all on a table, you can read it all, you can scent it all, you can just move around engaging with it, and the astonishing beauty of some of the plants. And in a beautiful place called Entheogenesis in Brazil, I worked with 90 children in their medicinal garden, and we created an Elixir lab there, where, again, all of them, they had no knowledge of this past history, and, of course, the history that was going on with all the indigenous people, of the use of the plants. And so it was really great, again, working with the gardeners there, as you can see out in the garden. These kids created these elixirs, and then they were able to present them to people as they came. So we've worked out ways of teaching them how to present these and offer them, and the tastes of them. And it was amazing because in Hotim, I don't know if you know it, but it's the most extraordinary, enormous outdoor art museum and botanical garden that is vast, and every artist has their own pavilion, which they select their own architect to build. It's beyond your imagination, the extravagance of this place, but also the dedication to that particular environment of finding all of those plants that got grown there, a huge herbarium, a museum they have there about that particular environment. And so these Elixir labs, this is one I've made recently here in Sydney, they just show incredible details about the plant as well. So they're very informative as well as experiential. I mean, it's art. So again, I always say you play with evidence and imagination, because art is the language which speaks to the heart and the soul. It's not, the facts, I don't want to create didactic work. But I want it, it's usually based on actuality, on the scientific data and experience of things, but as well as that, to bring it into a more imaginative play. I've created a big, huge herbal maze where you can see on large scale, sort of 5-metre high, big panels growing with the herbs in a garden, where you move in and out of all of these different images. But it's also, believe it or not, for a pharmaceutical company that is dealing with a whole lot of cancer. So there's kind of images of cancer cells woven in with with all of these other diagrammatic and botanical images, and using also very archaic sort of images of the medicinal images of the body. And then in Germany, I had the beautiful opportunity of creating a work for the IGA Berlin, which is actually a huge, enormous garden festival that lasts for about 5 months, where I created what I call Inside the Flower piece. It's like the cellular structure of a flower, but you enter into the space, and it is in fact totally a little museum of psychoactive plants. So I worked with, a lot of it's based on Louine's work, but I also worked with a pharmacologist at the Dahlem Botanical Gardens on the plants to select for it. So they actually planted all around the outside of the building, and so this little museum that you enter into and observe each exhibit like a little vitrine tells you about the plant in a picturesque way, not with old herbarium images, because of course there's so much of that material in Germany because they've been working with it so much with their very rich botanical history and their interest in this whole field and of medicinal plants. And so a lot of it was also based on Hildegard of Bingham's work. And so it was an amazing project to work on. That's, you know, this space was really evocative, and it was like being inside of the cellular structure of a plant with all these tubes hanging down it and water moving through it. And it's hard to explain. You can't, these sort of things are experiential. They're not really image-based. So you can sort of see some of the type of things that were displayed on, and everything was transparent inside. So it's layers and layers of transparency. And you can just, I mean, you all know these plants, so but it's just that it's just a way of trying to show them, to try and understand that long story of how they've been used and those extraordinary sort of images that they used to create of them. And then this work is, this is a whole little museum in Taiwan, a beautiful little contemporary 3-story museum, which I turned into the idea of a tree. This ground floor I mirrored the floor, and it's all concrete, this museum, so it was just this very beautiful bare sort of beginnings to bring this nature inside. And this ground floor is in fact a very old tree that had died in the nearby forest, and they virtually they preserved it in the most interesting way. And I've put it's laid out there, as you can sort of see, all its branches and roots are all laid out and form this enormous sculptural floor with big mineral rocks and lots of owls around it, and this sense of ambiguous depth because of all the mirrors on the floor, which you don't see, of course. So it's got this strange ambiguity about it, and it's this idea of there's a lot of fungi there, which was grown for it. And then the next floor up is called foliage, and this is a whole garden that was specially grown in the herbarium in the university in Taiwan, especially of all these plants that used to be in this whole area. And the extraordinary thing is that they're in hundreds of little vials, and then around the wall I've got big hanging transparencies and a film, so it's a very buzzy place, like as if you're inside the foliage. And then there's a big huge vitrine work that's 9 metres long. So, and it's 2 metres high. So when you walk around, you again within the vitrine, almost like within an aquarium or something. And then you just move through looking at, again, all these different aspects of the being of plants. but it moves through from this green end to a kind of a white end where it becomes all the dreams of plants, as if they're captured. I'm imagining they're captured there. And because it's written there about the dreams of plants, it brings people into thinking about all of that aspect of the plant. So it's really about bringing you into plant thinking and bringing into this being. A lot of the elements come from the herbarium. This museum is in the mountains in Taiwan, but this herbarium from the museum contributed enormous amount of material. And so it's a combination. They grew fungi on a lot of these sticks, and then they had a lot of my images from old herbarium books. And so it was this incredible, again, assemblage of different pieces, put together to try and tell these stories and capture these dreams of plants. You can sort of get an idea of it there because it creates a lot of reflection that you're within. And then the top floor was all about the habitat, and it's got big hanging veils of trees and sounds, a lot of sounds up there of birds and projections onto these veils. So I just thought I'd show you also that I did do a series of these water gardens, which was an exhibition, a couple of exhibitions years ago I did in Hong Kong, which have now evolved into a huge tapestry. So it was an amazing process to go through with making a tapestry. I didn't physically make it. They had amazing weavers weaving it. But just trying to evolve these plant forms within it, because I was having to grow them, as it were, from original images that came from these water gardens. And I wanted the water gardens because they had all the reflection in them to be able to create the image with, which I thought would look interesting as an image. And then it was as if different threads could start to create the growth of different plants within the work. So I can't show you the finished work, but it is finished, and it is living on this huge concrete wall, and it's 6 meters long, so you can imagine that it's a very vibrant work because, of course, all the threads through it. And it was an amazing experience as an artist to be able to see work in that other medium. You can sort of see the water, how it evolves. And just recently, I just thought I'd finish with this because I haven't got any work to show you exactly, except some research I'm doing now on the moss in Antarctica, because I've just been there this year, and I was observing all this work with mosses. And I will be doing big museum work about Antarctica, and the moss will be very much part of it. But it was so extraordinary to see that moss down there and think about that, how it's living there, how it goes through the winter, how it comes in summer. It sort of is just this beautiful, beautiful, spongy, but very threatened by climate change. And these moss fields are very, very precious in Antarctica. And it's a lack of water that's one of the reasons that they're very threatened. Yeah, but it was an extraordinary, beautiful thing to observe. And so that work's ongoing. So I think I'll just finish there. So I just wanted to show you a range of works of working with plants to try and give hope, and because actually when you work with them, you generate a sense of care and giving and empathy that it's very healing for people to work in that way. And so that's what I'm hoping my work can do.
Thank you so much, Janet, for inspiring us by showing us there are different ways we can transmit meaning, and that we might even be more inspired to protect those things through that. So if you have any questions, we have a microphone over to the left, and you can just come up there. In the meantime, there's a couple of questions from online. There's one person asking, I study regen at SCU and approach conservative farmers for their art form, and they are wondering how you wrangle conservative farmers into art projects.
I didn't have to. Because of being part of this Earth Canvas, the organisers of it they already are regenerative farmers, and they already it's a growing thing, it's enormously growing. But then they advertise that I'll be doing a workshop, and actually in my workshop I have local Indigenous botanists and ornithologists to walk us through country, but they put out the invitation to people, and some of the conservative farmers, out of scepticism and curiosity, came. So we were surprised. And then they ended up loving it.
So another question is, are there any particular influences or experiences that informed your interest and love of nature and alchemy?
Oh, it was very early in life, I think. I was always totally within that plant world, talking to plants and living within that world. And then I lived for a long time in the countryside in Italy too, where there was such an incredible close relationship with the nature there. And I was disturbed that in Australia we weren't having that really intimate relationship with our nature. So it was recognising that distance we had from it that made me want to work more with the Australian environment, yeah.
I guess I was just wondering if you have a favourite tree personality in your experiences, like for its personality rather than its form or physicality.
Yeah, I've had a few changes in that, but I have a tree walk at Bundanon where I'm, working with all the trees that used to grow there, and I'm totally in love with the spotted gum.
Yeah, beautiful.
For a whole lot of reasons, and
yeah.
It's the only part of my tree walk that are the original trees there.
Oh,
So the Maculata forest was there, and it's still very much in that area. And it's a tree I'm going to plant at my new place.
Excellent. Beautiful, thank you.
Thank you so much, Janet.